"You don't belong in this building," the hospital administrator said, looking Nora up and down like she was something tracked in on the bottom of his shoe. "The family waiting area is on the second floor. This is a restricted corridor." Nora Okafor did not move. She stood in the hallway of Mercy General Hospital's cardiovascular wing, with a worn canvas tote bag hanging from one shoulder and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. She wore a plain burgundy cardigan, the kind with small buttons that take forever to fasten in the morning. Her shoes were sensible, dark, slightly scuffed. She looked like somebody's grandmother who had gotten turned around on the way to visit a sick relative. "I'm aware of where I am," Nora said, quietly. "I have a meeting with Dr. Harlan at 2 o'clock. The administrator, his name tag read Fletcher, Hospital, Begrandestration, didn't even glance at his watch. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with the permanent expression of someone who had spent decades deciding who was allowed to be where. His eyes moved over Nora with the practiced efficiency of a bouncer at a club he considered far too exclusive for her. "Dr. Harlan is chief of cardiology," Fletcher said, spacing his words the way people do when they're not sure the other person speaks English. "He doesn't take walk-in appointments. If you're a patient, you need to check in at the third-floor desk. If you're a family member, second floor, like I said." "I'm neither," Nora said. Fletcher's expression shifted into something between irritation and amusement. "Then what exactly are you?" It was the kind of question he expected her to stumble over, the kind that was designed to make a person feel like they owed an explanation for their own presence. Nora looked at him for a moment. "I have at 2 o'clock with Dr. Harlan," she repeated, her voice carrying the particular patience of someone who has answered foolish questions professionally for a very long time. Fletcher stepped slightly to the left, placing himself more deliberately in her path. "Ma'am, I don't know how you got up to this floor, but I'm going to need you to come with me back to the elevator. This wing is not accessible to the general public, and I cannot have unauthorized individuals wandering." "I took the elevator from the lobby," Nora said. "I pressed 7. I got off at 7. I walked to the nursing station and told them I was here for at 2 o'clock with Dr. Harlan. The nurse told me to wait in the hall. I am waiting in the hall." She paused. "I'm not sure which part of that constitutes wandering." Fletcher's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being corrected in this building. He'd worked at Mercy General for 22 years. He had a parking space with his name on it. He had made significantly more complicated people than this woman comply with significantly less effort. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, lowering his voice into what he clearly believed was an authoritative register, "to come with me to the elevator. We can clear this up at the front desk." "There's nothing to clear up," Nora said simply. "I have an appointment." Fletcher pulled out his radio. The cardiovascular wing of Mercy General occupied the entire 7th floor of a building that had been expanding in fitful spurts since 1962. The fluorescent lights ran in long parallel lines across a ceiling that was just slightly too low, and the whole corridor had the particular hush of a place where people were either very sick or very focused on keeping other people from becoming very sick. The nursing staff moved between rooms with the practiced urgency of people who had learned long ago not to waste motion. Dr. Harrison Harlan ran this floor the way a feudal lord ran a small territory. He had been chief of cardiology for 11 years, had 3 research grants active simultaneously, and had his photograph in the lobby downstairs alongside the hospital's other major donors. He had also, in those 11 years, developed a set of behaviors that his staff had collectively and privately labeled the Harlan effect, a tendency to speak over nurses, dismiss the concerns of patients he considered non-compliant, and treat the cardiology wing as an extension of his personal reputation rather than a public medical facility. He was, in the language of his annual reviews, brilliant but difficult. In the language of the 17 formal complaints filed against him in the last 4 years, he was something else entirely. Nora knew about each of those 17 complaints. She had read every one. The situation that had brought her to Mercy General had begun, as these situations often do, with something small. A man named Robert Dupree, 61 years old, retired postal worker, father of 4, had come to this floor 8 months ago with chest pain. He had been admitted, evaluated, and discharged with a follow-up appointment. At his follow-up, Dr. Harlan had spent approximately 4 minutes with him, dismissed his continued symptoms as anxiety, and prescribed him a mild sedative. 6 weeks later, Robert Dupree had a massive cardiac event in the parking lot of a grocery store. He survived, barely, and spent 11 days in the ICU of a different hospital. His daughter had filed a complaint. Then 2 of his neighbors, different patients, the different doctors in the same practice, had filed complaints. And then the nurses started talking, the way nurses eventually do when they've stayed quiet long enough. And the complaints became a pattern, and the pattern became a file, and the file had landed on Nora's desk 3 months ago. She had read it on a Sunday afternoon at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold before she was halfway through. Fletcher's radio crackled. He spoke into it briefly. Nora, eyes the focused suspicion of a man who had decided she was a problem before he had any evidence for it. Security is on the way, he said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has just played what they believe is a winning card. That's fine, Nora said. She set her canvas tote on the chair beside her and sat down. She pulled out her reading glasses, positioned them on her nose, and retrieved a manila folder from the bag. She opened it and began to read. Fletcher stared at her. You're sitting down. I am, she agreed, not looking up. I just told you security is coming. I heard you. The silence that followed was the kind that Fletcher clearly found deeply uncomfortable. He had a system for handling situations like this, a reliable escalating series of tones and ultimatums that reliably produced the desired result, which was compliance, and quickly. This woman was not following the script. She was sitting in a plastic chair on the 7th floor of his hospital reading a folder, and she looked, if anything, slightly bored. Dr. Harlan appeared at the end of the corridor 3 minutes later, striding toward the nursing station with the full self-possession of a man who believed his time was always the most valuable in any given room. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a white coat that fit him the way expensive things fit people who are used to expensive things. He had the easy physical confidence of someone who had never been asked to wait in a hallway. He clocked Fletcher first, then the security guard who had just arrived from the elevator, then the woman sitting in the chair reading a folder. What's this? Harlan said, directing the question to Fletcher the way a manager directs a question to a subordinate, expecting an answer that will make the problem disappear. This individual, Fletcher said, claims to have a 2 o'clock with you. Harlan looked at Nora. The look was brief, assessing, and visibly dismissive. He saw what Fletcher had seen. A black woman in a cardigan with a canvas tote bag and sensible shoes, sitting in a chair that was meant for patients' family members. I don't have any 2 o'clock meetings today, Harlan said. He didn't say it to Nora. He said it to Fletcher. That's strange, Nora said, looking up from her folder for the first time since sitting down. Because your assistant confirmed it Thursday morning. I have the email if you'd like to see it. Harlan finally looked directly at her. There was a beat, very short, barely perceptible, in which something flickered across his expression. Then it settled back into authority. Who are you? He said. My name is Nora Okafor, she said. She did not elaborate. She folded her hands on top of the open folder and waited, with the exact quality of stillness that tends to unsettle people who are used to filling silence with the sound of their own importance. Harlan's eyes moved to the folder in her lap. He couldn't read it from where he stood. What is that? Documentation, Nora said. Documentation of what? Of the reason. I'm here. Harlan's expression shifted, the particular shift of a man who has decided to be publicly patient while privately furious. He glanced around the corridor. 2 nurses had paused near the station, pretending to look at charts. The security guard was standing slightly to the side, no longer certain what, exactly, he was supposed to be doing. Mrs. Okafor, Nora said. A small muscle in Harlan's jaw moved. Mrs. Okafor, this wing is a restricted medical facility. I don't know how you got the impression that you had an appointment with me today, but I assure you my schedule is quite full, and I don't have time. Then I'll be brief. Nora said, standing. She did it without hurry, without the performance of someone asserting themselves against resistance. She simply stood the way people stand when they are completely comfortable in the space they occupy. My office reached out to your assistant 4 days ago. The appointment was confirmed. The purpose of the meeting was disclosed in my office's letter, which your assistant confirmed was received and forwarded to you. She reached into the folder and produced a single sheet of paper, extending it toward him. Harlan took it the way people take things when they're not sure what it is yet, carefully, with the tips of his fingers. He looked at the letterhead. The color didn't drain from his face all at once. It went in stages, the way a tide goes out. The letterhead read, Illinois Department of Public Health, Office of Healthcare Regulation and Oversight. Below that, in a smaller font, Division of Medical Staff Review and Licensing Compliance. And below that, Nora's name, Nora Okafor, MSW, MPH, Deputy Director, Medical Standards and Accountability. Harlan read it twice. Fletcher had drifted close enough to read over his shoulder, and his own face had gone the color of old concrete. I oversee regulatory compliance and licensing review for medical institutions in this state, Nora said, her voice carrying across the corridor with a clarity she had not used until this moment. It was the same voice she used in hearings, the one her staff called the room voice. Not loud, not theatrical, but impossible to talk over. When my office receives a pattern of complaints from multiple patients across multiple quarters, I conduct a site review personally. That is what this is. Harlan's mouth opened, then closed. You, he started. He stopped. He tried again. You should have identified yourself when you arrived. I arrived for a scheduled meeting, Nora said, at the time and floor specified in the confirmation email. Instead of being directed to that meeting, I was told I didn't belong here. I was told to take the elevator back to the lobby. I was told security was being called. She paused. I'm curious, Dr. Harlan. If I had been a white woman in a business suit with a rolling briefcase, would Mr. Fletcher here have had the same concern about my presence on this floor? The silence in the corridor was so complete that the hum of the air circulation system became audible. Harlan said nothing. Fletcher said nothing. The security guard had taken a very deliberate step backward. That question is not rhetorical, Nora said. And it is going into my report. What happened next moved with the particular swift inevitability of things that have been a long time coming. Nora had not come alone. She had, in fact, notified Mercy General's chief executive officer of her visit in writing 5 days ago. Standard procedure for an unannounced compliance review, which was, technically, still announced, just not announced in a way that allowed the institution to hide what needed to be hidden. The notification had gone to the CEO's office. Whether it had traveled from there to the 7th floor was a question Nora's report would address in some detail. 2 members of her staff arrived via the elevator at 2:07 p.m., each carrying a document case. They were a young man named Torres and a woman named Achibi, both carrying the particular expression of people who had done this before and knew exactly how it went. They nodded to Nora. She nodded back. We'll begin with the patient records for the last 18 months, Nora said to no one in particular, in the way that a person with authority says things that are not requests. Dr. Harlan, I'll need a conference room. I'll also need your department's complaint log, your staffing records for the cardiovascular wing, and your documentation protocols for follow-up patient contact. You can't just walk in here and demand I can, Nora said. And I am. She looked at him directly. You have 17 formal complaints on file, Dr. Harlan. 7 of those patients are black, 4 are Latino, 2 are elderly with no family support. The demographic concentration is not random, and it is not coincidence. And my office is required by statute to treat a pattern of that nature as a potential civil rights violation under the Illinois Healthcare Right of Conscience Act and applicable federal guidelines. She let that sit for a moment. This is not a surprise inspection. This is the meeting that was scheduled 4 days ago, and that you, by all appearances, chose not to prepare for. Harlan stood very still. He had the look of a man watching a wall he had always believed to be load-bearing quietly develop a crack. The conference room, Nora said again gently, if you don't mind. The review took 3 days. On the first day, Nora's team pulled records. On the second day, they interviewed nursing staff, and the nurses talked, with the careful precision of people who had been waiting for someone to ask the right questions in a room where they were finally safe to answer. On the third day, Nora met with the hospital's CEO, a man named Ashworth, who had received her letter, had apparently not forwarded it to the relevant department head, and now sat across from her in a large conference room with the expression of someone trying to calculate exactly how much trouble they were in. The answer, as it turned out, was considerable. The report that Nora's office issued 6 weeks later was 43 pages. It documented a systemic pattern of unequal follow-up care, inadequate documentation of patient-initiated complaints, and a supervisory culture in which Dr. Harlan's seniority had effectively insulated him from accountability. It also noted, in precise and unremarkable bureaucratic language, that an administrative official had attempted to remove a state regulatory official from the premises based on apparent assumptions about her identity and role. Assumptions that the official's appearance seemed to have informed. Fletcher's section of the report was 3 paragraphs. They were very thorough paragraphs. Dr. Harrison Harlan was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending the full review. His clinical privileges were suspended while the licensing board conducted its own parallel investigation, which took 4 months, and concluded with a formal censure, a required remediation program, and a probationary period of 2 years, during which all of his clinical decisions were subject to secondary review by another physician. 3 of the patients identified in Nora's report were contacted by the hospital and offered settlements. Robert Dupree's daughter received a call from Mercy General's legal office 9 days after the report became public. She called Nora's office to say thank you. Nora's assistant took the message and passed it along. Fletcher was reassigned to administrative duties on the 3rd floor. His new responsibilities did not include the cardiovascular wing, or any wing on the upper floors, or any corridor, where he might be called upon to assess whether someone belonged. The morning the report went public, one of the nurses from the 7th floor, a woman who had worked the cardiovascular wing for 14 years and who had filed 2 of the 17 complaints, sent a message to Nora's office through the department's public contact form. It said, "I've been waiting for someone to see what was happening up here for 4 years. Thank you for sitting down and staying." Nora read it at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning, with a cup of tea that stayed warm this time. She had been doing this work for 26 years. She had walked into buildings where people took one look at her, the cardigan, the canvas bag, the reading glasses on top of her head, and made a calculation that was wrong in every direction. She had learned early on that the calculation was never really about her. It was about the person making it, and what they believed the world owed them, and how long they had been permitted to believe it without consequence. She had also learned that the most powerful thing she could do in those moments was exactly what she had done on the 7th floor of Mercy General. Not perform, not announce, not argue. Sit down, open the folder. Wait, because real authority doesn't need a lobby entrance and a name on the wall. It doesn't need to shout down the hallway or wave its credentials like a flag. It moves quietly, at a measured pace, carrying a battered canvas bag, wearing sensible shoes, and when the moment comes, it simply opens the wallet and lets the truth do what truth has always done best, which is stand there, plainly visible, in the fluorescent light, until there is nothing left to say.